discussion worship service, so I will attempt to give us something to talk about. Oh, do we? No, that's the, okay. So any announcements this morning before we get started? I can't think of anything.
I do have one. I found out just this week that unfortunately the Hospital Foundation is canceling their Street Party of Hope for September.
Oh.
So we were looking forward to that. Sounds like some of that stuff is struggling with the Hospital Foundation, some of their charitable things, but they're hoping to be back in another year. But for this year, they're not going to do it. So,
Okay.
which I know we were hoping to have our friends from Ballet Puerto Rico come and dance at that. They still would like to come up with somewhere to get together with us, some sort of gathering. So keep that in our minds, and we'll see what we can figure out there. So.
What about the event at your house?
That's August 21st on a Saturday, our annual bonfire service. We'll start at, I believe it's 3 o'clock. The swimming pool will be open, and we'll do a potluck supper, usually about 5, and then worship around the campfire after that. So hopefully.
And we did open that invite to the other youth groups of the other UCC churches that we're
Okay.
partnering with. So they'll let us know because they'll have the youth RSVP, so we know
Sure.
kind of how many are coming and stuff. But might see some other kids there too.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. So, first, also before we go into our discussion, is there any prayers that we want to hold up in prayer, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine from work who lost his uncle this last week.
Okay.
He had been sick and struggling, but it's still, still hard. So prayers for the dad and the family.
And I would hold up our friend Ned, who continues to struggle with some health issues. He's been very difficult to get a hold of. So let's keep Ned in our prayers as well.
And you had lived, well, myself, I have a conversation with our 4 children this afternoon on Zoom conversation in regards to my husband is starting to experience some what they call pre-Alzheimer's symptoms, and I have to have a discussion with them about it, and I pray that it just goes well, because it's not something that is easy to deal with, so.
Certainly we'll pray for you and Greg.
Son has a good friend from graduate school who lost a 1-month-old infant yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Lord God, please be with us today. Hold us in your hands. Comfort us as we deal with pain, grief, and sorrow. Help us to experience peace and understanding as we go through challenging times. Please keep our friends and people that we know in your hands as they deal with the loss of people they love and the loss of different expressions of who they are. Please help provide understanding to Donna's children as they hear about changes that are coming. Please support families that have lost little ones before life could even be fully experienced. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So today, I'm going to be reading Mark 6:14 through 29, and the title is The Banquet of God and Lavishing Grace. I have some commentary here from the weekly seeds that UCC, and the commentary this week is from Michael Anthony Howard, so thanks to him for sharing his thoughts with us. I will be reading the passage from Mark, and then we'll go through some of the commentary. The beginning is going to be a little bit about the history of what was going on during that time, and then we can discuss how it kind of fits into our world today. Okay. To focus our discussion, it's a short prayer. God of hosts, from whom David danced and sang, Mother of mercy and Father of Jesus Christ, in whom all things cohere. Whenever we are confronted by lust, hate, or fear, give us the faith of John the Baptizer, that we may trust in the redemption of your Messiah. Amen. So Mark 6:14 through 29. King Herod heard of this, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers were at work in him. But others said, that is Elijah. And others said, that is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom Herod had married. For John had told Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptizer on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately, the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head, and he went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. This week's protocol is violent and gruesome. Even some passages like this present us with an opportunity to face the political agenda embedded in the narrative of the gospel. There we can see how the gospel presents an alternative to the violence around us, where the banquets of empire are feasts of fear and scarcity and death. The followers of Jesus partake in the feast of love, abundance, and life. So, kind of the empire, some of the history behind how this could possibly happen is the Roman Empire was held as a monopoly on violence. So it was all about violence within the environment. It was a mix of vastly conquered regional metropolitans and regional areas. And although the empire itself was established through systematic military conquest, and most areas didn't need a strong army to control them, but there were some frontier regions like Galilee, Judah, and Samaria who conquered, where the conquerors, the foreigners, were seen as uncivilized. So military violence, campaigns of terrorism, public displays of torture and humiliation were deemed necessary to keep rebellions at bay. And there was a main focus on publicly hung mutilated bodies along the poles through the roadways leading to various cities. And this monopoly of violence is what led to Jesus' crucifixion, and it was the stage of the first Jewish-Roman war and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And kind of Rome was an aristocratic empire, and it had small groups, 1% to 2% of the empire's population ruled extensive villages of land with very little bureaucracy. And there was because of the way the control was done, it was Romans' monopoly through the threat of violence that gave rulers the power to enforce their will on much of the population, which with or without their approval. And they did that by controlling the region's main resource, land. Controlling the land meant controlling the means of production of food, by which they acquired vast amounts of wealth for themselves through taxes, rents, and tributes. The whole region of Galilee itself had neither cities nor resident rulers before Artemis. And Artemis is Herod's son, and he's the one that, even though it says King Herod here, it wasn't King Herod, it was his son Artemis that actually had the banquet. In the decades prior to Jesus' birth, the Roman military had marched through the regions and sacked the entire area, burning villages, enslaving the strong, raping the women, and killing the sickly. And to kind of show how violent this time was, King Herod actually married somebody from that town, a highly priestly family known as the Hasmoneans, and that was his wife. But when he wanted to have complete control over the area, he had his two oldest sons by his wife, who was a Hasmonean. He saw them as threats to his rule, and Herod executed them, all his wife and his 2 oldest sons. So that meant that one of his 4th son ended up being the ruler in that area. And at that time, for the first time, Galileans had a ruler with an administration. Artemis built a Roman-style court, 2 capital cities that were in close proximity to every village in Galilee, and with the violently enforced labor and taxes from the peasants of Galilee, Artemis funded a massive 20-year empire city building tribute to Rome. And that's the context which that's the context which Jesus of Nazareth grew up in. It's easy to miss, but Galilee is the setting of this week's reading. Jesus' preaching, teaching, and healing in Galilee had caused quite a stir. It's no wonder that Artemis wanted to know what people were saying about it. Here we have the foreshadowing of a passage many churchgoers will probably remember. Later in the story, Jesus will ask his disciples, who do people say I am? Their answers will be the same as the reports given to Artemis. John the Baptist, Elijah, and the prophets. When Peter confesses to Jesus, you are the Christ, Artemis says, John, who I beheaded, has been raised. These various contradictory statements illustrated how Jesus of Nazareth was perceived by the servant class as the bottom of the pyramid, and Rome elite at the top. So it's a lot of confusion. The setting of the banquet celebrating King Herod's birthday was with guests from the ruling class, the courtiers, the officers, the leaders of Galilee. And when his daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And we learn that her name is Salome, and she is Artemis' stepdaughter. So the other thought is that, perhaps Herodes was merely expressing her desires when which the girl, they think she's about 12, and where the girl was mimicking what her mother wanted and didn't comprehend that those words would be taken literally in that context. So when the story begins with an innocent girl dancing, it ends with her bringing her stepfather the head on a platter in front of a crowd of bloodthirsty aristocrats. The imagery of the girl holding a platter at a banquet is the antithesis of the message of the gospel. The birthday banquet of Herod Antipas is a stark contrast to the story in Mark that immediately follows, Jesus feeding the 5,000. Herod Artemis lives in a world of power and authority where he can make promises based on the belief that he can get anything he wants done whenever he wants anything he wants anyone to do. Only a select few are invited, consisting of those who must gain favor with the king in order to be recognized. It's a feast of scarcity and greed. Those who are in power use violence to protect themselves from the fear of those who challenge their right to rule. So it's a banquet in the feast of fear and death. On the other hand, the feeding of the multiple offers wholeness for those who are broken, healing for those that are sick, and sustenance for those who are hungry. It's the feast of radical inclusion. Those who are excluded, broken, and humiliated find healing and hope in Jesus, a common Galilean carpenter. It is the feast of hope and abundance. Those who begin believing that they will not be enough discover that there is more than enough, with more left over. at the end than there was at the beginning. Kind of the closing thought here was that economies based on scarcity always privilege some at the exclusion of others, believing that there's limited resources and only a few deserve to have access, rather than a world where people are envious of others' possession. Jesus invites those who are participate the chance to see that there is more than enough for the well-being of everyone. While the world is spinning out of control, people who have lost hope and health come together to find healing and wholeness and can be restored to life. Jesus' feeding of the multitude is a feast of life. When the faithful followers of Jesus gather, they are choosing to participate in the reign of God in opposition to the reign of the violent rulers of the world. It is a choice of compassion over fear, inclusion over exclusion, abundance over scarcity, life over death. So, just a few thoughts as you kind of think about what I read there. Kind of, in what ways is our world similar or different from the world that we just read about and heard about from that Jesus was living in? Yes, Lisa?
That people didn't have people didn't have the same religion or something.
Yeah, there's people that have different religions today too. Some of the things that I kind of, it made me think a little bit about is like, who controls our resources today? Like, what are our resources? At that time it was land. Today we have other resources that might not necessarily be land.
Social media. It's a good thing that we kind of thrive off of. We're always on social media. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of things controlling our big businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool.
Social media.
Maybe the power to influence
Yeah.
is, yeah. Obviously, money, the actual physical
money.
coins and paper money, but
Yeah. I was also thinking about political power. We still have the people that have much more power than others, and like the politics itself. Who's ever controls a lot of us, even though we don't.
I think another thing that we maybe could relate to that story is the privilege. I think there's, definite privilege in that story of those that were invited to that party, and, were the inn folks, right? And then, relate that today to the privilege that different groups of people have for different reasons.
Yeah.
It's not a physical power or thing, but
It is power.
it is very powerful. Yep.
Very, very powerful.
And to be having a mindset too, remember that same kind of privilege, and that then they had a mindset that they were the elite, they had the control and power, they did what they wanted to do, and anybody else was second best. And it's some of the same things, today, and they felt like they had to do certain things to, and now too, I'm saying then and now, they had to do certain things in order to make themselves feel or be, or stay in that privilege, by making everybody else feel like there was not enough of anything, only enough for them, and so they killed off and or did different things to people, either killing them, instead of raping women, making sure that they weren't around, the sick or the elderly, making sure they weren't around in order to give them more
Yes.
of whatever it is they were wanting then. Well, we have some of that same thing now.
It makes me think of, like we'll talk about it even at like work, not necessarily a power thing or a who has more, but like kind of that zero sum game where in order for me to have, I have to take from you, or in order for you to have, you have to take from me. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think kind of listening to the story, one of the other things I think about is such a simple lesson, but I think it was like I think it was a birthday cake. You get to cut the cake, and I get to pick the people who get the pieces, because that keeps it even. So if I get to divvy out the power, or I get to divide the power in the pieces, and then the other person gets to pick which one they take, it helps keep it even, because I'm gonna want just as much. I don't know. It makes me think of that.
That reminds me, I was with Lisa, like we were talking about the girls, and they were in Girl Scouts, and we were talking about, well, how do you, if you, like right now we're working through, okay, who's going to lead different sections and be the leader for that, and would it be good for you to be paired up with somebody else? Well then, if that's the case, what order, who gets to pick the topic first, and then who gets to pick their partner? Because that's a very different thing. So like some of the things we've thrown around is picking the topic and the partner at the same time is probably, that gives that too much thing. So it's like maybe you get the topic, and then who's ever at the end, if it gets the last topic, gets to pick their partner first, just to try to balance that, because it's and I think that that's very true in life itself, and how do you make that work out? Because I do think that inadvertently, or maybe intentionally, our whole society has been built upon the view of scarcity versus abundance.
In order for me to win, you must lose.
And I think there's some changing happening around that, but it's a battle.
And on a slightly different view of that, if you could look at the way primarily our government told our farmers how to farm their land. They told them, we have to produce, we have to feed the world as well as our country. Plow it fence row to fence row, every little inch that you can plow out, which in one respect is okay, but the problem is that they're not looking at the land itself as a resource, and what they're doing, how they're destroying that land by doing that. And not just the land, but things like our rivers that run through the farm fields. And there's no way to filter the chemicals out of that. So that scarcity thing that you talked about, hey, we got to do this. We have to, produce on every inch we can. When in reality, there's more than enough food to feed the world, and they really don't need to do that, but they created that scarcity thing, and we have to do this, and at the expense of the soil and the lakes and the rivers and everything around them.
one of the things that I've been thinking about, so this is all a meal, but there are many different meals that we talk about as we go through the Bible. There's a lot of things. So why has the sharing of a meal played such an important role in faith communities? Like, we share communion, we do lots of meals. Why do you think that that is? Yes.
So then people can get like a different variety of, sharing communion.
Food too?
Yeah.
Maybe because it is a common thing. We all are equal in that I have hunger and you have hunger, and it's this thing that we all must do. I don't know. That's what it's not a full thought, but just everybody has to eat. And so it is maybe kind of that leveling of us.
Because nobody ever escapes hunger.
Right.
I suppose you escape hunger if you've always got food, but you still experience hunger in some way.
Right.
You have to satisfy it. I've thought of it as maybe the way that we let down our guard a little bit. I don't know, but I feel like sometimes when you're experiencing a meal together, you are more real with each other than if you're just playing your power games.
I'm sure there's something too about like the aspect of making a meal for someone, like it's a service. Like I think of, a birthday or a whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll make you your favorite cake kind of thing. So I do it as a, let me give to you,
I've been, something that just popped into my mind as I heard, I don't know if somebody told me this or if I read, but somewhere in the 1990s, there used to be at the Capitol, there used to be a room where senators and other political people would meet and have a meal. But the press was not allowed in this room at all. It was a completely private area. There wasn't anything to showcase or to present to a public audience. You could just maybe have some of those heart-to-heart discussions and not have to worry about the public impression you were submitting. And since we've done away with that at some point, that went away. It might be contributing to where we are today, where it's just there's no middle ground. It's so stark, one side or the other.
And so much publicity of everything,
Yes.
From radio, television. Well, but I was thinking I said radio. Oh my goodness! But and what you're talking about actually did start in the 70s.
Okay.
And that when a lot of the senators, congressmen would come together and they shared a meal. They talked over things. When you're talking about sharing a meal, with that camaraderie, the ability to discuss different things that they had on their minds without the fear or judgment of outside influences, because they were sitting, their stomachs were growling, so they ate and they talked, and then, like I said, because of the advancement, if you want to call it, of communication in different areas, I guess it kind of broke down.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still there or not, but I do recall that it started in the 70s.
I had heard that they eliminated that room altogether, so there isn't any place for them to connect like that.
And that would really be unfortunate if you think about the fact that now every word you say is potentially recorded or reported publicly.
It's, I think it makes it very difficult to find compromise because you can't say anything. But, okay, so on another thought, like, who do you invite to your table and who might be missing? You know, for me, I certainly invite my family as much as I would like to. I think the stranger's missing from the table.
Mm.
It is interesting, like sometimes the kids will have a friend come by or whatever, you know, and it's not very often though that we have. The closest I can get to a stranger, right? Like somebody else's kid that I just haven't met or, you know, talked to all that much. But it is really, the conversation at the table changes when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it's just us, you know, okay, well, Tuesday we got to do this, and oh, you got to remember this, and but then when somebody else is there, it's a totally different conversation. Like, well, what do you do for fun, and where do you live, and you know, just all of the get to know people. So yeah, it can be a totally different conversation. So it is a very important missing element, probably a lot from the table.
And if you use table perhaps a little bit more metaphorically, who do you invite into safe places? And I was thinking as you were talking, Ash, about, you know, we have a horrendous immigration problem in this country. And you're either one of us or you're not one of us. And there is a very clear divide, I guess, in a lot of people's minds about that. And some are welcome at our table and others definitely are not. And, you know, it's a part of that either or mentality that we're living with. And somehow, if somebody new comes into the table, going back to the scarcity model, all of a sudden I have less. And I just don't think that's true, and I just can't quite wrap my head around how some people perceive that.
Yeah.
Do you think some of that is a fear of the unknown? I don't know this person. I don't know their personality. I don't know their habits. I don't know their eating habits. Are they going to eat twice what I do? I.e., you know, is there going to be enough for me?
Yeah, I think scarcity model plays a lot into it. You know, we take such great pride in the rights that we have in this country. You know, we all have these inalienable rights that we have, and it seems like they're ours and they don't belong to other people. And somehow if we share them, maybe we'll have less. I don't know. But I read a quote this week, and basically what I can't remember it verbatim, but basically the quote was saying, well, we think about rights that we have in our Western U.S. way of looking at the world. There was a reference to First Nation Cherokee leaders. They talk about obligations. So when we talk about the rights that we have, that we were born with, they will talk about the obligations we were born with. We have an obligation to the past, we have an obligation to the present, we have an obligation to the future, we have obligation to planet Earth. And that totally changes the narrative when we think about our obligations instead of our rights.
Yes.
I think that is very much, I know that people have such a resistance to taxes or something like that. We're always taught that taxes are bad. And I've recently just really rethought that and wondering, why do we look at it as bad? Why isn't that just why isn't it's my way of giving back. It's not something that's being taken from me. I'm giving it back to the world, to the place that I live, to, granted, I don't have as much say in where it's being used and what I'm using it for, but it's my way of giving back because I've been privileged to have as much as I do. But, like, I think that other people look at it as, actually, I know, that my husband will frequently say, yeah, our taxes are really high or something, and I'm just like, well, high is relative. Like, and we don't need it, so why do I have to have it? But that's that whole twist between scarcity versus abundance.
I wonder too, Jeff, from your point about obligation versus right. In the founding of this country, it was sort of, from England or whatever, I was obligated to do this, I was obligated, and so I wonder if that's why, specifically here, I think we focus so much on my rights, it was sort of like this is, the land of the free, it's freedom, because they felt obligated, and obligated had a bad connotation then. I don't know, but that's what I think obligated though is a good way to think about it. It is my responsibility to give back, to share what I have.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see how you think, well, I'm obligated. So how do you use the word?
Yes, and how Jeff was saying it is completely different than how you were saying
Uh-huh.
it, and it changes. Like, oh, I have to, instead of I'm privileged. Like I'm able to. This is kind of my job and part of my responsibility as being a part of the world.
And it's always a sense of balance. I'm not saying I don't appreciate my rights. I appreciate my rights very much. And we have a right to gather as this worshiping community this morning, and that's our right. But it's not all about what I get. It's about what we and all of society, all of the world, all of the planet, we are in this together. We have a mutuality. We have a sense of responsibility and obligation to one another. And so how do we balance that out? And I think we have done a very poor job of that. And I think some are raising that up and pointing that out to us very clearly now, and I think we need to pay attention to that. Getting back to the concept of meal that I kind of got us carried away from. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, that have good things to offer our friends and neighbors means that we need to be in this shared community where we can not only be able to grow and nurture the food that sustains us, but also to be able to come together in peaceful dialogue and kind of have conversation and
Around the table.
around the table, instead of having somebody's head served up on a platter.
Yes. And going back to the scripture what Jeff was saying, that they felt like there was their right and not their responsibility to do certain things, but their right to do certain things. And when you talk about that, I mean, yes, we have wonderful, freedoms and rights here, and if you've traveled to other countries, you appreciate some of those things. However, you see that some of them are not so great when it comes to some of the freedoms, our rights, and those differences of whether it's them or us, or they're not one of us. That, if they come here, then we don't have enough to for. And I think about even back when immigrants were coming to this country, that was a thing that was like, where did these dear ancestors come from, if not from other places? So how can you look at, and to me it's very hypocritical to look at someone of another nationality or religion and look at them and say, you're not welcome here, or I can't accept you because you're, and if you're here, then it's not enough for me, and I have to have it because it's my right, and say, just think back a few generations. Where did this come from? Where did we get to a place where we cannot see each other in a different, light? And then, as I going back to the scripture, when Jeff just said, instead of it serving our head up on a platter, that's what I feel like goes on today. It's that those rights that are taking over our responsibilities, our duty to and what Christ is asking to do. How I think I said to Oli last week, I said that one of the big things that I live with is how can you love God who you cannot see, but hate your neighbor who you see every day, and hold that, being such a vast. The United States is vast and has abundance of all kinds of things. How can you say that I have the right to have this and this and this, and you don't have any right? And I can take over the waters, the land. You have to do this a certain way, but it destroys some of those things that give us that help us have that abundance. So, yeah.
I feel like we're a truck stuck in a mud puddle. Spinning our wheels right now. Some people apparently felt they had a right to storm the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. But, on the other side of the ledger, some people a couple of weeks ago in Minneapolis felt they had a right to surround the car of a member of the Minneapolis City Council and wouldn't let her leave until she agreed to acquiesce to 6 points that they wanted the council to approve, on the left. And it's the same thing.
Yes.
It's the exact same thing, but one side was doing it, and now the other side's doing it. And, that what we're coming to? It scares me. But it certainly raises the question, how do we as people of faith, we have our strong social views, but we are also called to be more than that, and we are called to be reconcilers and peacemakers. And that might be part of the hardest thing we have on our plate right now, is how do we be peacemakers in this time? How do we bring people together?
How do we be that example to the world? And probably one of the most noteworthy examples right now is the discussion within the Catholic Church whether to allow President Biden to partake in communion, because in their eyes he supports abortion, which the Catholic Church stands against. But so they're trying to decide who gets to come to Christ's table.
Right.
And because it's not our table, it's Christ's table. So who are we to decide something like that? And there's other examples within particularly the Christian church, particularly in this country, where people have been excluded for a variety of reasons from even participating in an open worship service. Jeff mentioned earlier, we have the freedom to gather here. I don't believe we have the freedom to limit who can come in the door.
I think one of the ways we act out that responsibility is by focusing on the things that we have in common with people versus what are our differences. So myself included, I know we talk a lot about, well, I can't believe they have this view, and I can't believe they have that view, and it's so different from my view. But I think it's also important for us to focus on the things that we have in common, and maybe that is part of the going to the dinner table together, because again, even if it's as simple as, well, you get hungry and I get hungry. There we go. We have something in common. You know, you have to eat and I have to eat. I got to breathe and you got to breathe. You know, so even if it's the most basic thing, because I think if you start by focusing on what you have in common, it's easier to have those tougher conversations around the table. Versus just come to the table and you are wrong and I am right and my way or no way, you know, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you can start with, well, we both breathe, let's start there. You know? We both need clean air to breathe. How about that?
Yes.
I want to affirm that, Shelley. I also want to take it a little bit further. I think, yes, we need to look for the common ground that we share. But at the same time, I don't think it means giving up our own cherished values. And again, that's it's a difficult balancing act to try to figure out what that means. I mean, this faith community has made a decision to put a rainbow flag in its window. And we're telling everybody that drives by that flag, one of our values. And we're welcome to have anybody come in and to have a conversation with us, but it's not like we're going to change our values. So it's keeping the dialogue going, but still being able to, you know, hold on to what we value most.
I remember thinking a lot about that when David was having his Eagle ceremony in here. We had a lot of people here. I mean, it was over 40 or whatever that were here for his Eagle ceremony. And I know the beliefs of the values of some people around here. And I remember being, I was trying to make the decision to have it here, would I lose people coming to his ceremony because of the rainbow flag? And I haven't heard that that happened, and nobody that came, and it didn't become a discussion point. It became completely focused on David and his achievements and stuff, and I was really, really happy about that. But I was kind of hoping that somebody would choose to discuss it with me later. And that hasn't happened either. So I don't know. And I think that that's, sometimes we focus so much on what's common that we choose to ignore what's different because we can not have that conversation respectfully. So, breaking the barriers. So maybe food will help us break the barriers.
Yeah.
Well,
And I was thinking of something that Matt said earlier when he was raising up social media and the power of social media. And when the social media craze first started, I was hoping that that would be a unifying factor, but I think it's had just the opposite effect. It has tended to divide us more because we travel in circles of people who think alike now, much more than before.
Well, there are still, I'm not to discredit you, but there are times where it should probably not be so aggressive towards just people in general. People are mean on all the social media and stuff, but there's sometimes, like the last year here with Corona and everything, obviously kept people connected, but I was out of school for the entirety of my last year, and the only good connection that I could keep was through playing video games with one of my buddies online, and there was times obviously we got upset at each other, but it was nice to still be able to talk to at least someone I knew that wasn't a familiar face.
Well, and think about where this congregation would have been, and along with many, many, many other ones, if we didn't have the social media aspect to be able to worship together, even virtually. So yeah, you're right, Matt. There are some very positive aspects to it when it's used in the right manner.
When it's balanced, when you find that balance. Because exactly what you're saying, I know I will see things on there that'll anger me, and I'll be like, I don't want to see that anymore. Get out of here. But in the same breath, I should look at, I should know and understand other people's views. Why do they think that way? But it sometimes, some of it can be so frustrating and so just visceral anger at it that it's like, I can't consume that, So it's a balance. It's a balance.
And I tell people that I took an oath and when I went in the military, I took an oath to defend, uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, which means that regardless of a person's opinion, thoughts, right views, or anything else, I defend their right to have that. I defend their right to worship in any way they want. I defend the right. I may not follow it. I may not agree with it. I may not, but I do. And I've had people ask me or say to me, because I'm a minister, ask me, how can I defend or how can I protect gay marriage? And I say, well, one reason is if I don't, just 50, 60 years ago, barely, marriage to my husband was illegal in this country. And so if I do not defend the marriage of someone else, they love each other. I love my husband. I don't want that right taken away from me. So I'm going to defend that right. And like I said, it may be something I may not agree with in certain areas, but I stand with, that. And finding that balance can be a challenge Like you said, when looking at something on social media, on the news, or we're reading in the paper and go, and feel like you just, like you said, the anger is built up, and then at the same time you go, okay, that's their right to have that thought, opinion, yeah.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining me today and for kind of discussing what feels like a really, I don't know, it was interesting to read more about the what might be have been going on that would have kind of sparked that, and it also has made me think a lot about and us about how it kind of still is, different pieces of it certainly reflect how our world is today, so appreciate it.
Before we close, Donna has offered to grace us with a song, so Ash, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
Donna, if you would, if you're up there, we'd love to.
Okay. Because of what we were talking about, and Ash was saying that as far as there being enough in our world, and as people facing and having that's something that I feel very strong that we need to really hold on to, that there's more than enough. And the song is called More Than Enough. There is more than enough in a universe that you created. There is more than enough on a planet of sacred design. There is more than enough for humanity made in your image. Why would I worry? Why would I doubt? Why would I ever think I'd go without? Why would I worry? Why would I doubt? Why would I ever think I'd go without? Your infinite love made me, made everything I see, and all that will ever be is your infinite love. Let my soul know the truth, whatever I choose to do, your infinite love will prove more than enough, more than enough.